Hello and welcome to the Occult book review. This week's book is The Undying Stars, the truth that unites the world's ancient wisdom and the conspiracy to keep it from you, and it's by David Warner Mathisen. This book is all about the spiritual cosmology of the ancients and how all of the world's sacred traditions are built upon a common esoteric system of celestial allegory. So in other words, the stories in the Bible, for example, which have been literalized, are actually allegories for something much bigger, something much more profound, and something that is holographic in nature because it's part of our own journey, and it's also something that's universal and we can see all around us. That's a very, very basic description. Since this book, which is Mathisen's second, I think, he has produced a few more and appears on lots of podcasts, and he has a website called the Mathisen Corollary, so check out his work there. I'll just give a brief overview of the book in this review, and hopefully it will inspire people to go and check out his work. So what Mathisen is proposing here is that stories that were imposed upon people as being literal are not literal at all. In fact, they're allegories and contain archetypes, not just archetypes in terms of figures, and this is really important, but archetypes in terms of our own journey and the trials and tribulations we will face and potential pathways and solutions to our problems. And it's all encoded in myth if we can just find a way to kind of untangle the truth from the untruths and the aspects that have been added by people who want us to take them as literal stories, which have rules and regulations which the original allegories did not have. It becomes very obvious early on that what we're talking about really is the idea of as above, so below. What's universal and above us is also has a parallel within ourselves and here on earth as well. So the book is full of diagrams which really illustrate it better than I can in a talk like this, because, for example, one story Mathisen gives as an example is the story of Abraham about to kill Isaac and how his son is replaced by a ram, and he has his own diagram which he creates in order to show the way that the zodiac and the constellation can illustrate that in terms of how the stars and the yearly cycle works. And the idea of cycles comes back again because the book really is all about the holographic nature of reality. So I was going to mention Lost Star of Myth and Time by Walter Cruttenden, which also deals with these huge vast cycles being reflections of much smaller and personal cycles. But what does that mean then to us? What it means is that whatever's going on in our lives, we can look to these stories and we don't have to read them as being literal, as I said, and being applicable only to people who lived thousands of years ago. The whole point of these stories, and whoever gave them to us originally knew that they would always be important. And you can go into different theories as to why the stars were used, but the idea is that they're there to help us. And if we can read the truth of these stories, it's a vast reservoir of wisdom which we can call upon in order to help us find our way through life. As I mentioned already, the idea of archetypes then doesn't just mean a certain character or a person. An archetype can also be a situation, and a situation in which, by reading the stories in the right way, we can find solutions. As we progress throughout the book, then Mathisen goes into areas that you might not initially expect. He talks about the holographic universe, he talks about Kundalini, he talks about the world serpent, and he talks about an area that I find very interesting, cymatics, and he details how the visual representation of wavelengths is tied to the Green Man and the Medusa. He talks about how cymatics also appears in art, in ancient art, and you can link the kind of designs and the architecture of ancient structures to representations of certain sounds that are associated with ways of attaining certain states of mind, which is kind of shamanic in its own way. For Mathisen, then, the shamanic tradition is what can save us. This returning to the holographic, at least being able to see that you can't not affect what's around you, and you can't not be affected by what's going on around you. He talks about Dr. Jeremy Nadler's work, Shamanic Wisdom in the Pyramid Texts, and how this misrepresentation of Egypt is something that needs to be changed. He talks about the wiping out of indigenous people throughout the world. He talks about the possibility of there being an ancient seafaring culture that was able to be the people who potentially were the ones to give us this system of celestial allegory. But it makes you think then, like, there must have been a shamanic context to these people as well, because what they're saying is so universal, because it's still what shaman are saying today. If you read any contemporary shamanic author. I think as well there was parts of the book that reminded me of the work of Itzhak Bentov. If this is not a particularly well-known book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum, but it's one that I'd really recommend. And Bentov talks about the idea of prophecy, the idea of a holographic nature. But what he's talking about is something that's natural. It comes back to what Dr. Jeff Kripal is saying in the new book, The Supernatural. Just because it's outside of our perception, our knowledge range right now, doesn't mean that it's not real. So a good example that Bentov gives is, if you have an apple seed, for example, you can look at that apple seed and you can say, right, I know that one day that seed is going to become a tree. I know what the tree is going to look like, and I also know what fruit the tree is going to bear, and I know roughly how long that tree is going to last. Does that mean you're psychic or a prophet? No, of course not. It just means that you have the knowledge looking at that, and you're able to predict what will happen. Except you don't know where the seed is going to end up. So you can't take any seed and know what it's going to be. So in that way, it's like the idea of free will and what Mathisen is talking about in terms of zodiac cycles and the universe and you as a person. You can know about your potential. It doesn't mean that you're going to achieve it. It doesn't mean you're going to make the right choice. It doesn't mean the seed is going to land on a place that's fertile. I hope I'm being clear here. But when you upscale that to a universal level, and then you move it dimensionally to a psychological level, you can see that you can have these predictions, these archetypes, these metaphors, and they're there to help you. If you can choose the right answer, I suppose, you can find your way to a fruitful and a happy life and transcend this physical and this idea that you need to take things literally, when in fact you are a spiritual person, really. That's what Mathisen is saying, and that's what these stories are saying. Mathisen explores the various attempts to prove that ancient and indigenous people had this wisdom and knew about the constellations and the stars and the idea of allegory, the holographic nature of reality. The book becomes quite dark at the end because he also details the crusades and genocides and what exactly happens to people when they come up against the literalist interpretation of the Orthodox religions, particularly, of course, the Abrahamic traditions. But just like the turning of the stars and the constellations, Mathisen offers hope that inside us all we have the potential to return to this knowledge, and looking for that knowledge is in itself the pathway which can release us from the shackles of orthodoxy and dogma, and we can return to our own inner potential, which is always with us anyway. So The Undying Stars by David Warner Mathisen, another book I highly recommend, and you can find David Mathisen online at the Mathisen Corollary. So I'll see you again next week for another The Occult book review.